Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
And thank you for joining us for the final Your Legislators of the season. I'm Fred Martino. For our weekend viewers, we should note that we're taping this program on Thursday, so by the weekend there certainly will be new developments which you can find anytime online at krwg.org. For the final program from Santa Fe, I'm very pleased to welcome today Representative Rebecca Dow. Representative, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's great to have you here. So I want to start with the big job for the legislature, and one that has been a real challenge during this session, and that is coming up with a budget for the next fiscal year. Give us a sense of where we are on this.
Yes, sir, it is quite the challenge. And during the time when we were working on the solvency package, the Republican Party brought forth a solution that we thought would work, and that involved about a $12.5 million reduction in the legislative retirement fund, about $1.5 million from the legislative balance cash reserves. They were funded at over 100%, as well as asking everyone to give up 1 year of capital outlay. I think that was around $6.5 million. So those three things together would have created, not only solve the deficit, but also created a little bit of reserve so that we could protect our credit rating. And we were not able to get consensus from the Democrat side on that. It's difficult to give up capital outlays. Some people call those pork projects. I know they're important for the communities, but we thought that would be something that we could do without. And we really didn't see a need to overfund our legislative retirement fund or our legislation reserves. I mean, many of our districts were asking them to be at 3%. And we thought, why shouldn't we reduce ours by $1.5 million and go to 100% funded? So we were not able to get consensus on the Democrat side, and so we still have time to fix the budget, and that's an ongoing process. I'm a freshman, but I'm sure that'll be the primary topic of our discussion as we wrap up the session on Saturday.
Some are fearful that there could be a need for a special session if indeed vetoes are made to some of the revenue enhancements. What do you think about this? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I am hearing that, and it's just super unfortunate that we did have funds that could be swept, or funds that were not needed immediately, so we could have avoided revenue enhancements. But that's where we've at. We've created new taxes, and I believe we're somewhere over $400 million over what we are able to spend, and we're almost assuredly going to be in a special session. Word on the street is a lot of these items will be vetoed, and we will be back for a special session.
Okay, and of course, as you know, and the reason that we're in this situation, the governor indicated she would really not accept new taxes, but she might be open to closing some tax loopholes in our current tax system. I want to get a sense from you, were there ever enough politically viable loopholes to close? Because we really didn't hear a lot of specifics about that, either from the governor or the legislature.
Well, there are a couple of representatives that have been working multiple years on a large tax reform package, and Representative McCamley, as well as the primary lead, Representative Harper, have been working together with a lot of, Senator Smith from our area as well, on this massive, huge tax reform, which is much, much needed. We have so many loopholes and exemptions and cutouts, and it's an interesting process. And I believe it's a very, very hefty document with over 100 and some tax reforms that would not only take care of our revenue situation, but position us to be able to have strong economic growth in the future, primarily to be able to recruit new businesses from out of state and to grow the businesses that we have now. So but instead, most of our tax revenues that we have passed are going on to the citizens. So there is, I think it's for 412 or 415, there is a large tax reform bill, and I do hope that that gets through. There are aspects of that each party can live with, and that the House and the Senate can live with, as well as I believe the governor is still working to find some resolution on that. That would be ideal if we could get that passed.
As I understand it, one of the challenges there is that the look at the fiscal impact of that bill wasn't really clear. In fact, a direct quote that was mentioned by the Associated Press said that it could mean excess revenue or it could mean less revenue. And so, you know, if that's the case, do you have hope that down the line there'll be a really sound fiscal review of this, so that if this doesn't really have a chance until next January, that you'll at least know, okay, here's what the fiscal impact will be?
Yeah, well, we have to do something. We cannot continue as we are. You know, we continue to lose businesses that are interested in viable businesses. We're primed to be able to serve them, and then when they look at our toolkits for incentive and for recruiting them, they pass. You know, they move on to Arizona, California, Texas. Many of our neighboring states are beating us out on job growth, and so we have to do something. So do I have hope? Yeah, I think we're a volunteer legislation up here, and we're away from our families and our businesses, and I think it kind of makes us optimistic, inherently optimistic, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't think there was hope. And if something doesn't happen this session, something does have to happen next year. We cannot continue on this exodus of our population, the decline in our incomes. We have to do something to generate new revenue, not just, you know, you mentioned revenue enhancements. When that comes in the form of taxes, we're working from our existing pool of revenue, and we've got to create new jobs and new economic growth for our state.
Okay, let's talk about one of the taxes in specific terms. Senator John Arthur Smith, as you know, proposed a 10-cent a gallon increase in the state's gasoline tax. We have, as you know, one of the lowest gas taxes in the country, and it hasn't really been increased to keep up with the inflationary cost of building roads, other infrastructure, a couple decades before it's been raised. What do you make of this?
You know, there are multiple gas taxes. There's a 2 cents tax at the rack. There are proposals out there that base the tax upon the cost of oil and gas. So as oil and gas prices rise, the tax at the pump goes down. As oil and gas prices drop, the tax at the pump goes up. And of course, there's Senator John Arthur Smith, and I think he brings a lot of wisdom to the table. And you know, also is in a position where he's proposing bills that, in a different economic situation, he would not propose, and everyone finds themselves there. And so I'm inclined to favor those things that incentivize growth. But I mean, we're going to have to do something. I believe there will be a tax at the pump. Will it be 2 cents? Will it be 10 cents? Will it be variable? Remains to be seen.
Okay. What about alcohol and tobacco taxes? As you know, polls show that these are really popular with the public, and public policy experts say that this is really only fair because these substances pass on a lot of costs to government.
Yeah, I mean, that is such an interesting topic, and my expertise is working with vulnerable populations, children and youth, and so I'm not on tax and revenue, and I don't get a lot of time to go deep into the weeds on these issues. But on the surface, you know, we'll take the tobacco tax, for example, and we do spend a lot of money in New Mexico on the diseases that are caused by cancer. Yet if we look at the tax incentive, there are loopholes. I don't want to call it loopholes because they're federally protected in our pueblos and our tribes. So if we increase the price of taxes from a private business, tax-paying business in New Mexico, but I can drive 20 minutes and get it at an exempted rate from a business that's close by, what are we really doing? And as well as, you know, someone who lives in Las Cruces down in our neck of the woods can drive to El Paso. So when the tax incentive is so great that an available alternative online or nearby prevents you from having to participate in that tax increase, is it really accomplishing its goal, or is it one more reason for people to go away from businesses that are paying taxes in New Mexico and look for alternatives?
Okay,
and that's really where I'm trying to balance my decisions. And there was a tax increase on liquor that, when you were to really put the pencil to paper, it was a $3 and almost $4 a liter on wine. So when you multiply that times a gallon, that was it was a $600 increase on liquor tax. So I've only had the opportunity at this point to vote on one cigarette tax and one liquor tax, and when I weighed it with the exemptions and how readily available alternatives were, I had to vote against those incentives in order to keep the businesses that exist alive.
Okay, I want to get a sense of where you stood on the various proposals to legalize, tax, and regulate cannabis. It doesn't look like any of this is going to go through, but as you know, proponents said this was a way to boost our economy. It was a way to reduce costs in terms of law enforcement and increase revenue in terms of tax revenue, new tax revenue. What are your thoughts?
Well, so in regards to cannabis, hemp, and recreational marijuana, I have been able to, between Health and Human Services and Labor and Economic Development, weigh in on a couple of those. And I'm very supportive of medical marijuana and the expansion of that to meet our need within our state, and those people who would also have the right to come from out of state to receive health services in our state. And so on those initiatives, I've been able to vote positive for those. And hemp, I think hemp is a great opportunity, especially for our neck of the woods, which is so heavy in agriculture. Hemp is a great, our climate's great, our soil's great, our water situation is great, and so I think hemp is a wide open opportunity for us, and I was able to support those bills. And I hope there is a latecomer to the race, a hemp bill that was passed off the House floor last night, or maybe it was the day before. Time's running together. But anyways, it should be on the Senate side, and hopefully we have a version that can be supported by the administration.
Okay, of course, yes, there were some vetoes once again of hemp legislation. But in terms of the recreational marijuana, you were against that?
Well, I was never asked to vote on recreational marijuana, and so I'm glad that I can continue to research that and learn about that. I've seen a lot of pros and a lot of cons. We've had various, it's interesting that you mentioned law enforcement, because we have heard testimony from law enforcement officers in in Colorado, that are saying, hey, you guys might want to take a little pause on this. This is what's happening to us as we progress. So, I think that verdict's still out, and if we're able to focus on medical marijuana and also hemp for agriculture, that would give us some time to see if there are any negative repercussions from recreational marijuana in the other states that are choosing to do so. Okay,
as you know, there's another proposal that might have a little more hope in terms of marijuana. It would reduce penalty for a half an ounce or less of marijuana to a $50 fine, essentially decriminalizing marijuana possession at that very low level, a half an ounce or less. Where do you stand on that?
I don't have a stance on that. It seems reasonable, and I'll take a look at that bill. And that seems like a reasonable accommodation, especially with the direction that we're heading. We got to keep in mind also that we still have a conflict between federal and state law. I had a constituent call who was a veteran who was using medical marijuana, and he was being evicted from public housing. So even if we're able to take some, that was federal, so that he was living in a house that was required to meet federal law. So even though he had medical marijuana in New Mexico, he still had a conflict with federal law and had to find different housing. So I think we still have some conflicts between state and federal law, but this is not my area of expertise, but it sounds reasonable, and it sounds like we're moving in the right direction. I think we are as a nation as well.
Okay, as you know as well, another controversial issue, and one that's also a national issue faced by many states, and that is, in the absence of a federal minimum wage increase, states and localities are looking at ways to increase the minimum wage. And in the legislature this year, a lot of traction behind a move to increase the minimum wage for the state to $9 an hour. There is another bill that would raise it to $9.25. Where do you stand on these?
I'm in Sierra County as my hometown, as well as representing Grant and Hidalgo. Sierra and Hidalgo in particular are really facing very hard economic times, and our small businesses in Sierra County would probably struggle to even go to the 925. And I think you made a really good point. You said states and localities. And I am, whether it's school districts or whether it's municipal code or whether it is minimum wage in this case, really believe in letting the local levels make those decisions, as Las Cruces and Albuquerque and Santa Fe have. I think when we've got this hold harmless, we don't know what's happening with home harmless, we don't know what's happening with bonding capacities, that our municipalities are really facing tough times. And when we raise minimum wage, it's not just on business, it's on those employees who work for the municipalities, the cities, for the small businesses. And I do believe that those decisions are best kept at the local level.
Okay.
With that being said, I also think we need to take into consideration those people that we're targeting to help. Because even though it's not a check, it's not an income that they cash and then pay their rent, we are subsidizing their quality of life with housing, Medicaid, childcare, help with college, cash assistance, food, utilities, in some cases phones and internet. So we are, in a sense, equalizing between our state and federal initiatives to equalize that standard of life. So to simply, move, there's even a $15 an hour minimum wage, but $9.25 is looking more like what it's going to be. We need to really consider what our eligibility is for programs that help low-income families and not inadvertently drop them off a cliff. So those are, it's not just as simple as should people earn $9.25 an hour. What we're trying to get at is their quality of life and their standard of living. And many times when you add their benefits with their wage, they may have more disposable income than our working poor, our small businesses out there that are struggling to survive. And what I don't want to do is take a young mom or a single mother off a cliff and she's worse off than she is at the same time that we shut a small business down that was barely surviving in our current, with not enough customers, or they have a new regulation that's going to require them to upgrade their business. So it's just not as simple as it would seem to just make a decision in a vacuum on a single issue.
Okay.
They all have chain reactions and benefits and pros and cons.
All right, and of course another way that some legislators were trying to help improve quality of life and also the economic health of the state was a bipartisan bill for investments in broadband internet, but the governor vetoed this. Where did you stand on this?
Well, that came through Labor and Economic Development as well as a floor vote, and I voted for both of those. I mean, there's been a lot of great bipartisan support for some bills that we all see the need to grow the economy. So there's a lot of effort on both sides of the aisle to find new ways to grow the economy. I would at least like an explanation as to the veto. That would help me a lot to go back to my constituents and help me understand and be able to give some sort of explanation as what the vetoes were meant to accomplish.
Okay. Another veto that was very controversial, Republicans carried a bill which would have prevented the state from penalizing teachers who took more than 3 days of their contractually negotiated sick leave, and there actually was an override in the Senate on that veto. Where do you stand on that issue? Because again, it would be coming before the House to do an override there.
Yes. Well, I voted for the bill. And I am 100% committed to making sure that teachers are able to take their negotiated leave without penalty. As far as where the veto goes, I guess maybe I'm a freshman, I'm not in the know, and I'll have to wait and see on that. I'll probably follow the lead of the sponsors, and you're right, those were Republican sponsors, and I'll follow their lead. It's a very high learning curve for me, and to know what is the right decision in a veto, why things are being vetoed, what's happening behind the scenes, and what are the repercussions of doing so. And so there's a bigger picture, and I know that both sides of the aisle will continue to advocate that teachers are able to take the leave that's provided for them in the contract, all the benefits that are provided for them in their negotiated contracts without penalty.
I appreciate your answers very much, that a lot of this legislation is really very complex. The implications of doing things on the surface may seem simple, but they're not always simple at all. And I want to get into one that's rather complicated, and there are actually a lot of different bills that are out there for this, ethics legislation.
Okay.
There have been so many different ideas on this, not just in this session, but over the years. And one of them that really had traction during this session was putting this before voters next year as a constitutional amendment to create an independent ethics commission to look at ethical decision making. What are your thoughts about this?
You know, I haven't heard a bill on that, and I haven't heard discussion on that. Was that originating on the Senate side?
Yeah, well, actually, as I said, there are many different bills on this, but this was actually the one in particular that seems to have the most traction, was to let voters decide, but then it goes as a constitutional amendment, and that would not happen until 2018 in a vote. And what it does is creates an independent ethics commission. And some legislators like this idea. They say that avoids the issue of conflicts of interest if it's an independent commission. Others say, no, you know, this is of grave concern that puts a lot of power in a group outside the legislature. Yeah. From hearing about this, if you can't comment on that specific idea, what you think ought to be done in terms of enforcing ethical decisions in the legislature?
Right. I mean, that's a very complex, the idea of enforcing an ethical issue is very complex in itself, because even if we are independent, I mean, independent of what? Being appointed by the governor, we all have our own experiences that shape our worldview, and most of us identify ourselves as one party of another. So I don't know how it's appointed. I don't know, but really none of us are truly independent. So it does need to be discussed, and again, a really high learning curve for me. But just first listening about this and knowing that Representative Dines has talked quite a bit, one of the guys who's a Republican in the House is looking at different ethic issues, and we need to do something. But the idea that we can legislate away bias or politics is kind of probably not a reality, but we do need to do something. We have a very complicated legislative election process, re-election process. Our lobby, the way that we lobby and pass bills in our state is unique among all 50 states, of course. As we like to say, we're different. So I need to learn more about that and be able to take a stronger position and take a good look at each bill if they actually make it to the floor. And we see that on it. So it's great to have a temporary calendar.
Yeah, along those lines, Representative, as you know, there have been moves by some, including former Representative Terry McMillan, who say that because of the complexity, because of the varying proposals on so many different things, New Mexico really needs to look at how the legislature works, that we need, instead of part-time volunteer legislature, paid full-time positions. Have you formulated an idea on that, whether that's a good idea?
It's definitely something that should be considered, and I would hope that the Ethics Commission would be taking that into consideration. And we are the only state that does not pay our legislators, and these campaigns cost money, and you're away from your businesses, and there's lots of sweet deals that are made that help people be here to represent their causes as well. I mean, it's something to consider when we have a volunteer legislation. What drives people to be here? You know, my passion is to create real economic growth for New Mexico and to better the life of the citizens in Sierra County. But it is difficult for me to be away from my business for 60 days. And, you know, it's very complex, and I do think there needs to be reform. And I don't think that option should be off the table completely, although I have no idea how our state would pay for it.
Yeah, that's so much driving decisions right now in New Mexico. There is a real fiscal problem. One, though, that wouldn't have cost money, at least not really a dramatic change, and there's a lot of disappointment about this. It was the failure, it appears, of a move to create an open primary system in New Mexico. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm disappointed to hear that died. The majority of our state, well, we're moving towards independent and declined estates. I don't know if it's the majority, but we definitely have a growing population of independent and declined estate, and I believe they have a right to vote in every election. What that looks like, I don't know. I mean, some people say open primary, go in and vote for one candidate of your choice. Some people say, Democrat votes for any Democrat, Republican votes for any Republican in a primary, and those that are declined estate and other could vote for any other declined estate or other candidate. So I really don't know what it should look like, but I do think that every person is entitled to a vote in every election that we have, as long as they're a registered voter and they're a citizen of New Mexico.
Were there other bills that appear to have failed that really disappointed you as a first-time legislator, things that you were excited about possibly being approved?
Well, of course, I was hoping that some of my bills would get through, and I've learned a lot that now that I've been here. One of the ethics reform ideas would be limiting the terms of legislators, and it was not uncommon to hear a bill on the floor when someone would say, "This is the 4th time I presented this bill. This is the 5th time I presented this bill. This is the 6th time I presented this bill." And if that was not a budget item, that means they've been working on that for 8, 10 and 12 years. So I had a bill that would have, I'm hoping, I'm going to continue to work on it in the interim, would help us revitalize our rural vacant buildings. And so when a building is vacant for more than 3 months and the utilities have been turned off, you can't turn them back on or occupy the building until you bring it up to the current building code. And that is very expensive, and especially in rural New Mexico for a small business, it's a deal breaker before you even get started. So even your big box stores are coming in and building metal buildings on the other side of town rather than revitalizing our downtowns. So of course the bill I'm disappointed in was would have directed the Commerce and Industry, or the Construction Industry Division, to look at the historic building code and existing building code and see if there was any waivers, non-life safety waivers. I'm not talking about fire safety or any life safety issues, but non-life safety issues that could have been waived in order to help us revitalize our downtown areas.
Okay, Representative, maybe next year. And thank you for joining us on Your Legislators, and good luck in these final few days of the legislature up there in Santa Fe.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Hope you guys are enjoying the warm weather down there.
We are, very much. Take care. Have a safe trip back.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Thank you for joining us all this season on Your Legislators. I'm Fred Martino. If you ever miss a program on KRWG TV, remember you can watch all of our shows in the television section at krwg.org. Have a great weekend.